right, welcome everyone. It's August 5th and we're in Gene Key 7. Gene Key 7 is also about leadership. Last week we talked about Gene Key 31 and the gift of leadership and the city of humility. It was epic transmission as we step into a new sense of leadership. The divine feminine is ready. It's ready to lead, but it's ready to lead in a different way. And that's what we sourced last week. And this week, we get to talk about the other aspect of leadership. So Gene Key 31 and Gene Key 7 in human design together make the channel of leadership. And we're going to round out our experience of leadership by also talking about its shadow, and that's the shadow of division. That's what's on the menu for humanity. And when we presence what our role is right now as midwives, we think we've talked about that. Midwives, healers, shaman, way showers, we work between the worlds. We have access to, we can say, the 5D or the imaginal realm. We have access to that heaven realm, the realm of miracles, serendipity, magic. But we live here on planet Earth with a density that is not awake. We are the ones, we are the vessel that brings awakening. Other than us being here, it wouldn't be here. That's something to really let sink in. So if ever there were a time when you mattered, it would be now, because our consciousness is on the precipice. And so, I always go down rabbit holes as I'm preparing for these talks. And I went down a rabbit hole with an article that was written. And I always think that as much as Facebook is spying on me and listening to me, right? Have you ever had that happen where you go onto your computer and it's exactly the thing you were talking about? I also know that that's happening in the 5D. And have you experienced that as well? That there are things that serendipity, the connection with that imaginal world is bringing you as information. So what I received as information was this article that was written by Jonathan Haidt, Haidt, and it was called "Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid." Why the past 10 years of American life have been uniquely stupid. And I can see smiles on your face. I'm going to turn up my volume here. Maybe that's me. Oh, okay. I see what the issue is. Thank you for letting me know. All right. Hopefully you can hear me better. So what the past 10 years, so some of you are smiling about the past 10 years being uniquely stupid. You can relate. There's something in it that resonates. And Gene Key 7 is going to talk about the shadow of division. It's the gift of guidance. And we're going to see that guidance isn't actually what we think it is. And then it is the city of virtue. And last week we left off with this statement about virtue and from Gene Key 31, which is trust in your own inherent virtue. So I'm excited to place like some more context around what we were talking about so that we can show up powerfully as new paradigm leaders, as divine feminine leaders. And I'm going to use some of the work of David Hawkins today. Some of you remember his work. I think he passed in 2012, and he wrote a book called Power versus Force. He also wrote The Eye of the Eye. So his contribution was really a map of consciousness. And I'm discovering about myself that I love maps. Maybe you love maps too. The Gene Keys is a map. And we talked about the work of Gurdjieff and the map of consciousness called the Ray of Creation. We've talked about that in our live streams, and how this world, this biosphere, this living planet that we're on is World 48. And the imaginal world is world 24. And the world of shadow and density, the beginning of evil, is world 96. And we're going to reference some of those concepts. Now, maps are not the terrain. So let's not get confused that a map is 100% accurate. Like, and we're not really going for accuracy, are we? We don't need that. We're going for, it's like an impressionistic painting. Someone is painting a view of what they experience as reality and packaging it for us so that we can check in with our inner gnosis and feel into the truth of it, learn from it, use it as a contemplation. There you go. Angela says guidance. Yes, exactly. All right, so let's hop into a little bit of this Gene Key 7. So we begin with the ring of union. I want to presence that first, because where we're going in this whole thing is we're going to union. And we get to remember that we're playing a different game. So the world, when we look at the world on the level of shadow, and I suspect that the author of the article that I referenced is going to be looking at, it has looked at the world through the lens of the shadow. And from the lens of the shadow, it's dense. It doesn't look like it can change, but we know that we're the vessel holders of that quality, that non-linear quality of miracles, that non-linear quality of like rapid exponential shifting and changing, the awakening, the flowering, the blossoming of consciousness. We are the vessel holders of that. So while we see what others see along this plane, because we're not here to deny it, but we also are here to integrate that there is something that's possible that doesn't seem possible from the level of the shadow. And that means we're in the ring of union. So that's what's possible inside division. The understanding the matrix of division is actually the codes of union. And we are given some clues through guidance, which is going to be the transmission of listening and space holding, to virtue. And I'm gonna put some meat on those bones today. So the ring of union brings understanding. These are some words around union: discernment, commitment, clarity, and empathy. And so virtue, as I was listening to Richard Rudd's transmission of this, here's some words for virtue: moral fortitude, power, which is interesting, power, talismanic power. I love that, talismanic power, the source of all that is best in us, the aspect of our essence that goes with us when we die. It travels with us. And that's where I think we get that no gains in consciousness are lost. Eckhart Tolle, who says that. The illuminated dream of eternity. Here's another definition or word for, or phrase for virtue: the illuminated dream of eternity hidden in our bones. Just feel that for a moment. Oh, does that feel good? So the thing about virtue is that we can grow it. We can accumulate it. We can develop more skills to have more of it, to bring more of it. It's like the vessel that we are. We shore it up. We clean it out. We purify it so that the light that runs through it is that illuminated light that is always there. And we cultivate it through our thinking, through our words, through our actions. And this is really where the map of consciousness comes in. And I'm gonna pause that for a moment because I want to talk about the dark shit right now. Because there's some stuff to say about that. So we get to go back into division. So let's placeholder like where we're going, what we're really bringing to the table. And then let's take a detour through what we already know, what we can see on this plane of existence about what is happening to our world. So if I go back to that article that was written, why the past 10 years of American life has been uniquely stupid, we get kind of an expose on social media. And this is not going to surprise any of you because we've got movies that are out there, and I think we all have our own experience, right? Particularly over the last few elections and the pandemic in 2020. So he talked about, and this is an article you can read, so I'm just going to weave some highlights so that we can understand what we're facing here in the shadow of division. The three things that he says hold democracy together, which is social capital and trust, strong institutions, and shared stories. And that's really why this kind of group is so important. We are sharing our own stories, and this goes into our sisterhood activation. But he says that those three things, social media weakened all of them. And that really wasn't the original intention. But, and again, there's so many unintended consequences to our quote, great ideas when we're in the ego mind. And he says that in 2009, Facebook did something that changed the course of history. And that was the like button. And shortly thereafter, Twitter did something, which is the retweet button. And then Facebook integrated that as a share button in 2012. And those things changed the algorithm. So instead of getting news that is linear in time, you're getting algorithm curated content based on basically the mob. And so it overinflated power and ideas, and also the algorithm realized that the things that were getting the most traction had the most energy to them. Anger, trigger. And we're going to go into some in the map of consciousness that David Hawkins has put together. We're going to see some of the emotions that get triggered, that get reshared, so that when you live in that bubble, you think that small piece of information, that could be a small piece of information, is larger than it is. You lost proportion and you're activated and pissed off. So it basically encouraged dishonesty and mob dynamics. And we lost this quality that we're really talking about here in these sessions of contemplation. We got into right and wrong, black and white, and we lost our ability of reflective thinking. And the pace of it sped up so much that the way that we have always disarmed conflict has been to slow down. Have you ever had that rule in your own life, that when you receive a text that pisses you off and you've responded, it has not worked out well? What's worked out is you put the phone away, you go for a walk, and you deal with yourself, right? That's the path. But when we have this device sitting in front of our hands and it's so tempting to do something about it, and when we act, we create more division. So there we have a very practical thing to give ourselves space and time. One of the things he said, and he referenced like the Federalist Papers and James Madison in the beginning stages of the creation of how do we create this democracy and how do we shore it up. It is through those things of cooling passions, slowing things down, making things take time, which is why our government has these checks and balances. And it's not perfect, and I'm not advocating it. I'm just simply sharing that there was intentionality baked into the system to slow things down. And isn't that interesting that we are on a trajectory of speeding up? And so what he was sharing is that the rules and the norms and the institutions have all been eroded by a like social media can overthrow, but it cannot govern. So it leaves us in a vacuum. And this is where we come in, because the existential question that's being asked at this time is, who are we as a people? Now, this is a contemplation for the ring of unity. Who are we as a people? And this North Node in Aries right now is asking you, who are you individually? Because it is a series of individuals, groups of individuals that make up who we are. So what I'm hearing is, as part of the zeitgeist right now, the energy of today is to really get clear on who you are and what your values are, because that is what's forming the collective. And then we can have a vision for the collective. So he talks about 2011 to 2015 really being the fall. This was the fall of humanity. We had this kind of like techno moment where we were like, oh, technology and our positions are going to save us. And that was like pre 2011. And then 2011 to 2015 is when we went into this decline, when our social structures just broke down. And he's like, this is where we became highly fragmented, hostile, and we started living in bubbles. Super interesting. And he's really likening it to the Tower of Babel in the Old Testament story, which I won't go into. And really what ended up happening is that the fringes, there's a few studies that were done tracking people's beliefs. And what happened is, on the left and on the right, the fringes, so 8% who identify as progressive on the left and 6% who identify as conservative on the right, were the ones who shared the most posts. And they were political posts, divisive posts. And then he calls everyone in between the exhausted majority. Anybody can relate to that? So we can kind of see how we've been worn down, how our victimization, our compliance with the system, and this is like a call to action to wake up, wears us down. And we've lost context. We've lost proportionality, meaning that things that only affect a very small amount of people become now writ large on the scene. And that would be like something I was researching, transgender. It's a very small amount of people, but it's in the zeitgeist. It's a large conversation. So we've lost proportionality with it, in thinking that like everybody is experiencing this. And I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now it's on everyone's mind. So that's how culture shifts and changes. And social media is responsible. And it's not like we're going to get rid of it. We just have to we get to be aware. We get to be awake. We've also lost contact with mercy and truth. And one of the things he said was really interesting. Studies have shown that disagreement actually makes you smarter. Right? I imagine that's not fighting disagreement. I imagine that that is sitting down and sharing diverse opinions. So remember, we're in the ring of unity. So who do you get to be as you are sovereign in yourself? North Node in Aries saying, stand in your leadership, stand in your sovereignty, truly let go of your victim consciousness. There's no one who's going to save you, and comma, you don't need to be saved. And that level of personal power, what is it for? Well, it's for getting in the conversation. And we've talked about how when people are more than two worldviews apart, it's like ships passing in the night. We can't hear each other. So instead of seeking to be heard, we might need to bring in the gift of guidance, which is to listen, to seek to listen. I want to say one more thing about that I found was really interesting in Jonathan Haidt's conclusions about where we go from here. And he referenced a couple studies that showed that unsupervised play in children is what grows them up to have the capacity to work through things. Isn't that fascinating? I bet many of us, as this age, we've had unstructured play, unsupervised play when we were little. Raise your hand if you can. If that was you, I'm just going to look on gallery view for a minute. Yeah, the world was different. We didn't have to go from this appointment to this appointment to this appointment to do our massive amounts of homework and to do that appointment. We weren't structured like that. We weren't supervised like that. And that gave us some capacities to work some things through. And so what he was saying is that those born in 1997 and beyond did not create this current problem, but they will be handed this problem. And so a lot of us, I know that there are some of you here whose work in the world is to support young people in becoming empowered and sovereign and rewilding them, allowing them to be their natural selves and to work things out is part of how we get to do that. He had some other great ideas. But he also said, and here's a cautionary tone, and we already know this. I think this article was maybe written a year ago. And we know, as we're experiencing already that kind of hockey stick growth in technology through like ChatGPT and the creation of content through AI, that those bots in 2011 and 2015 were already there, bots that were serving up content and mining personal data and then creating narratives to serve up that were not true. We already know that that was happening prior to the election in 2016. But what we now are faced with is a much more sophisticated way of that AI is now communicating to us. It's much more sophisticated, and there are many more of them. So we're really going to be challenged. And I think part of governance is going to have to put up some fences around it, but you can never put as many fences around something as an internal barometer of wholeness, goodness, and let's use the word virtue. And so that brings us back to David Hawkins and the map of consciousness. So I had this laminated. I was like, or maybe I got this laminated off of Amazon or something. You can try to find it. Map of Consciousness from David Hawkins. And here in the red below, he categorizes. So he's basically using kinesiology to tap into the frequencies and put a number to it. He's creating a map of these lower energies, mid-level energies, and highest expression energies. These would be these energies of virtue. So and on the back, he's kind of got an explanation of these. So I want to just give you a little context, because this is super interesting, that helps us really. If we don't have a map, we don't know where we're going. We know that we are going to a place of goodness, wholeness, but we don't know what that looks like, and we don't know how to evaluate where we currently are. That's the gift of it. So he says he did over 250,000 kinesiologic calibrations. And I think that's like muscle testing. And he did it over 20 years. And I feel like his legacy is like he was rigorous. And so he said that also these numbers, which is really interesting because he'll give something a number. So let's say shame has the number of 20 on here. And then self-enlightenment has the number of 700 to 1,000. So that's the range that he's working in. But he said that it's not linear numbers. It's not, it's actually exponential numbers. So he's talking about that 300 is not twice 150. 300 is to the 10th power. So these amplify. So an increase in just a few points represents a major advance in power. Now, this is really important for you to know, because as you move from level to level, and this is a more integral approach where there are levels, and we're at one level and we want to go to another level in our worldview. We want to expand our capacity for virtue. So he says the rate of increase in power, what is power? The ability to affect change. This is what we're in this game for. I didn't just share with you divisiveness so that we can all sit around and go, wow, it's really fucked up, isn't it? Damn. And then go on our ways. No, I'm sharing this with you because we need to take the next step in our own evolution and also see the map so that we know where we're headed. We're going to orient our drishti, our third eye gaze, to that place. So as we move up the scale, our power is enormous. Our ability to affect change is enormous. And this is collaborated. I'm going to tell you this. This is not the only place I have heard this information. This is also in Gurdjieff's The Ray of Creation as well. This is Eckhart Tolle says this. So there's something that people are feeling through their own gnosis, and then they're using reason, their mind, to be the conduit. And that's like more like Gene Key 17, that sharp mind, to understand it in a way that we can digest it, and then we can orient our consciousness along that trajectory. So let's just presence, like level 20, I said was shame. He says, when you get to level 200, that's where things start to shift. So we've got 20 through 175 being like world 96. If you remember that transmission in June, where I talked about the worlds. This is the world where we have shame, we have guilt, we have apathy, grief, fear, desire. And that desire that is like addiction, money, prestige, it's outer success on the worldview trajectory. Then we have anger. And he's like, things start to change with anger because anger starts to break things down. He said it's the fulcrum by which the oppressed break out into freedom. So that's why it's got a higher level. It's 150. And then, but it's not, it's still in the Shadowlands, deep in the Shadowlands. And then 175 is pride. And he's like, here is where people aspire to. And this is again, world 48. Like this could be the starting point of world 48. This is the world we live in, where it feels good, but it's not conscious. It's not awake. And he said, this is where people feel good. They move away from shame, guilt, and fear by reveling in the contrast of that. And he said, it's the basis of religious wars, political terrorism, and zealotry. And it blocks recovery. It's divisive, hence where we are, and it blocks recovery from addictions. So as we start to make the turn, if you remember your own spiritual path, we start to make the turn with 200, and the word is courage. It takes a lot of courage to confront yourself, doesn't it? It takes a lot of courage to see that there's nothing separately real, that you are the common denominator in your play. So this is what encourages exploration, accomplishment, fortitude, and determination. This is where productivity begins. I think we're still in World 48. It's still not conscious, but we've made some turns. It's at least a cleaned up prison, as some of the spiritual teachers used to say. Now we get to 250. That's neutrality. We stop being polarizing. We stop getting triggered when we read an article and then we share it. We stop. We just stop that behavior. We stop responding to a text message that triggers us. This is where we drop our rigidity. We start to see the other side of things. This is where you can start to have conversations with people who disagree with you, because it doesn't threaten your sovereignty. You are neutral. You no longer have a deep interest in conflict. This is where the ring of unity starts to seep in. You're not judgmental, and you're not really interested in competing, and you've really examined the role of guilt in your life. Guilt, again, is like right above shame. It's like level 30. It doesn't support. So after that, we get into willingness. And I'm not going to read all of them, because I'm going to give us, there's another piece I want to say to this, and then we're going to go into our activation. So willingness, acceptance, reason. So reason here is where we start to apply. So I just got an email yesterday. Nassim Harriman, who is I hope I said his last name correctly, but he's a world-renowned physicist who believes that he just put together the formula for what he calls, I think, 0-point energy that is going to change everything. So he right there is 400. Like, that is a major contribution to the trajectory of humanity. He's talking about how, well, he's really talking about the nature of reality, and maybe at some point I'll digest some of his information and share it with you, but it's really exciting work. And the only thing inside of 400 is that there's still subject object. And we're going to see that we move out the more on the map that you step into the ring of unity and become more of your spiritual self, you lose subject object. Because the subject object is personality and the object out there. And we start to see with the ring of unity that there's no separate I. That's where the duality of us and them starts to melt away. So that was really the confusion that was brought to us by Newton, the Newtonian physics, in 400. Also, I think Descartes, I think, therefore I am, which some people I've heard, I am, therefore I think. He got it wrong. He got it backward. But that's really where polarity started, the black and white, the us versus them, the identification with ego became like as a part of our philosophy. So then we move into energy level 500. Remember, it's 10x. And that's where the energy of love comes in. So here's where we want to play. Love. 540. What's above that? Joy. This is where love becomes more unconditional and it's experienced as inner joy. Now, remember, we talked about this. You can hold inner joy in the midst of tragedy, joyfully participate in the sorrows of the world. And then we have our top level 600 peace, and that's his state of non-dual enlightenment, self-realization. And if you were alive today, maybe there's more worldviews, right? Because it is constantly expanding. It is not static and fixed. As Ken Wilber says in the integral theories, that we are, as we occupy a worldview, we're actually creating the potential for other worldviews. So that's exciting. That's the infinitude of that, of who we are, of our true nature. So thank you, David Hawkins, for that. Thank you, Wayne Dyer, who reminded me that David Hawkins said that. And then we're going to wrap up with the final piece, the circle of humanity. And this is where I think we can be the most effective. And then we're going to go into our sisterhood activation. So Gurdjieff talked about this, and he got this from a Hasidic folklore, from Jewish folklore, that our world is held together. And again, this is a map. I'm not saying it's right. It's a map. Our world is held together by 36 conscious individuals. It's called this, he calls it the circle, the conscious circle of humanity. And these 36 people, it feels to me, the reason why I'm bringing it up, it feels like the city of virtue. They don't know each other. They don't even know if they're in it. So there's no pride in being virtuous. They're not virtue signaling out there saying, hey, look at me, I'm so virtuous. I'm in the 36 council and you're not. They are simply being it. And according to tradition, or that understanding, their frequency holds in place the world. So we've asked this question, and it begs the question when we talk about the ray of creation, and we can feel the density of guilt and shame and the shadow frequencies. Why does that just not overtake us? Why has humanity not like slumped into a sinkhole of negativity? We all have it in us. And aren't there days when we do slump into that sinkhole of negativity? Why does that not overtake us? And I think it's because of what David Hawkins says, and that is that these energies at the top are exponentially more powerful, and it doesn't take everyone. It just takes enough. And we're going to get into that in a second. So Gurdjieff says that these 36 create a sturdy bandwidth around our planet of protection, blessing, and guidance. Gene Key 7. Wayne Dyer, in his book, The Power of Intention, quoted David Hawkins as saying, and this is super cool. I love this, as, you know, my mind just likes to see it like this. This is very Gene Key 17. One person operating in pure love and reverence for all of life counterbalances the negativity of 750,000 people. One person who vibrates at illumination, bliss, inner peace counterbalances the negativity of 10 million people. And at the time that Wayne Dyer did that power of intention, he said that there were 22 such sages alive today. Gene Key 7 is the sage. So there are people who have Gene Key 7 in their frequency walking around. They're influencers in a positive way, but maybe you don't even know who they are. One person in grace, pure spirit, non-duality, and unity can counterbalance the negativity of 70 million people. And there are 10 sages alive today since that writing. And so this is like, I love this. This blows my mind. One avatar at the highest level who earns the title Lord, Lord Christ, Lord Krishna, Lord Buddha, counterbalances the negativity of all of humanity. Yeah. So we get to raise our frequency. Virtue is a muscle. Virtue is a skill. It's earned. It's something that we all have access to because it's fundamental. It's our goodness. And so part of being on the path is not to feed the demon, except if you're feeding the demon with Lama Tsultrim's feeding the demon, which is turning that demon into your ally through the gift of guidance. Let me listen to you. Let me hear you. Let me be with you. You know, Richard Rudd said that when he goes and sees people, he's the founder and the bringer of the gene key transmission, and he's enormously popular. And when he goes and sees people, he said, when people see me, they end up talking the whole time. He said, I honestly don't even say hardly anything. How many times have we gotten a reading from a psychic or an astrologer, and all you want to do is talk? It's often because we are not really seen and heard. We don't feel seen and heard. And so we have containers like this, and we're going to get seen and heard in our container as we go into the sisterhood activation. But imagine the humanity that really just wants to be seen and heard. And that doesn't mean you have to listen to vomit out of people's mouths. No way. We have boundaries now. You know, when you're awake and on this path, you got to have boundaries, and you get to have boundaries. And you also get to be present, because sometimes the biggest work you'll ever do is listening. The programming partner of Gene Key 7, and here's like the mic drop of this transmission, is Gene Key 13. Remember that 13 transmission? We talked about empathy. So yeah, Gene Key 13 is discord. We have enough of that. Discernment. It requires so much discernment to step into another's guidance. And at the highest level, the city level, is empathy. To really meet people where they're at. Be so secure in who you are. And so open to receiving gnosis, that disagreement, that I'm actually allowing myself to be influenced. I'm allowing myself to change. How many people have changed in the last 3 years? How many of you have changed in the last 3 years? Yeah. Significantly. You've allowed yourself to be influenced. You're not rigid. You're open. You know you don't know everything, but you know enough about who you are. And you know enough about what you're here to do and what you stand for, that you can cultivate it. So at the end of the day, it's very practical. Like, we don't need to talk bad about each other. We need to edify each other. When we have problems with each other, we need to go directly to that person we have problems with, and we need to share. We need to share our truth from our heart, not as a projection. No one's responsible for your feelings, but you get to share your feelings so that you get to be known and transparent. And you know what? You might be wrong, and that's okay. Because we're not here to be right. We're here to be in union. So let's gather all the positive energy that we have generated here through your listening, through the spirit that is in this space, in this room, in the spaces in between you and me. And let's beam it out. May all beings benefit from the merits of our efforts. Let's bow into the center. Namaste.